So now we're going to talk about what motivated people to go and explore. We do know the three G's are what motivated most people: gold, God, and glory. And we talked about the different countries that went and explored. One country was a little bit different than the other two, and England was the one. How are they different? Well, we talked about France and Spain. Both had settled and claimed land in North America. Remember, we said France had a good relationship with the natives, and Spain did not. But both of their colonies they were financed by the king. The king actually paid for it. England's different in this aspect because the king doesn't have any money, so he's too poor to pay for exploration. But we know the 13 colonies were English colonies, so obviously somehow the money came from somewhere. So if the king doesn't have the money, who would? Well, businesses often have money, and maybe businesses would invest money to make money. And that's exactly what happened. So we have the joint stock company. The joint stock companies are created to make money. How does it work? Investors pool their money to finance colonization, meaning that wealthy people get together, take a little bit of their money, put it all in one place, and they create a business. The business is to create a colony. The colony is to make money. Again, the goal is to make a profit. That's what businesses do. So the king gave them permission to create colonies. They create colonies to make money. Now, what does the king get out of this? He still gets money. See, he didn't put any money up to do this. He just allowed them, gave them permission to do it. But we know he can tax them. He's going to tax them and control their trade. But he's eventually going to tax them too much. And we're going to talk about no taxation without representation later and how that leads to the American Revolution. Here's a seal in this picture. This is a seal of the Virginia Company of London, probably one of the most famous joint stock companies. And they're granted by King James I. Now, why is the Virginia Company of London so famous? Well, they also have created one of the most famous colonies, too. A colony, James. A colony in Virginia from James. Jamestown, right. So, Virginia and other southern colonies were founded, why? For money. The joint stock companies are there to make money, so they're looking for gold. Literally looking for gold. Virginia, when the settlers come in Virginia, they will pan for gold in the James River. Now, I don't know about you, but the last time I went to the James River, there's a lot of trash and stuff floating through there, and some pollution, and maybe some fish. Some good catfish, too, but I haven't seen much gold, and it's really not there. But there is also land, and if they can't find gold, land equals money. So if you were poor in England and didn't own land, which that was a lot of people, you could come here and have your own land and get money. So you've heard about Jamestown, and this is John Smith, and you probably heard about him too. Besides the Disney movie and Pocahontas, which there's a lot of stuff there that's not really true, John Smith is credited for helping found Jamestown. Most of you probably remember what year Jamestown was founded. Do you remember? 1607, right? Very good, by the Virginia Company of London. Jamestown is credited and known as the first permanent English colony. And it's very important to remember the first permanent English colony. There are other permanent colonies from Spain, in Florida, and other countries. There were English colonies that were there before, but they weren't permanent, so... Men, again, as we said, were looking for gold. So John Smith is credited for starting this colony and also helping it survive. He got them through something called the Starving Time. 1609, worst winter ever. And shortly after the colony was founded, more than half of the settlers had starved to death and had died of disease. It was so bad that they ate their horses, and then they ate their dogs and the cats and the rats. And eventually, they did finally eat each other. I hear people taste sort of like chicken. Anyway, how does he do it? Well, before this happens, he institutes the policy, if you don't work, you don't eat. And because the gentlemen were not used to that, he whips them into shape, and he uses his discipline and his leadership style to get them through. So, we know John Smith is credited for helping found Jamestown and getting through the Starving Time. Well, they make it through the Starving Time, and that's just great. But they're still not making any money. Somebody is going to come along and help them make money. And it's another John Rolfe. How does he save Virginia? Remember, we said there's not gold. There's really no gold in the James River. Well, there's a different type of gold. And this gold comes in the form of tobacco. So John Rolfe learns how to grow tobacco from the Native Americans. And the climate in Virginia and the southern colonies is perfect for this crop. And they export it back to England, and people go crazy for it. So it becomes something called a cash crop. Cash crops are grown for Money. So finally, the colony is making money. The joint stock company, Virginia Company of London, is happy now because it has a profitable colony. Thing is, once it starts really making a big profit, the king decides to revoke the charter and take it over himself. It's good to be the king. Who settles in Virginia? Well, some of you guys might be big fans of the UVA Cavaliers, and you've seen their mascot. He looks kind of like one of the Three Musketeers. He's got a nice fancy hat and a sword and a nice outfit. To me, he looks kind of rich, and that's what Cavaliers were. They were English nobility, rich people, who received large land grants from the king. Now, if you're rich and you're going to get free land from the king, are you going to get good land or bad land? You're going to get the good land. Where is the best land to grow crops in Virginia? In eastern Virginia. Okay? So the Cavaliers get the better flat land in eastern Virginia. And these are going to become the plantations later on. So, well, if you were poor and you showed up, what would happen? So, I can imagine the poor settlers show up and they're like, oh, this is fantastic. I finally made it to England. I'm going to have my farm here. And the Cavaliers see the poor people like, no, you are mistaken, sir. This is our land. You poor people cannot dilly-dally. You must keep on walking to the Shenandoah Valley. And that's exactly what happened. Poor English immigrants showed up, and they were told to keep on going. They have to go to the Shenandoah Valley in western Virginia where the mountains are. The land, yeah, there's land there, and they can still have land and farms and things like that too. Not good land, not the best land. So we don't see large plantations in the mountains. We see more small farms and cattle farming too. Well, what if you couldn't afford to come over here? Well, you could be an indentured servant, and a lot of you guys probably have heard this phrase before too. You could promise to work for 7 years in order to get payment for your ticket to the New World. Once you worked on a plantation for 7 years and worked off your debt, you were released from your job and you could have land. So you are thinking too, yes, I can finally have my own land here in Eastern Virginia. No. Remember, if you're poor, you don't get the good land in Eastern Virginia. Where do you go? Right, the Shenandoah Valley. So the indentured servants will move out west in Western Virginia and settle farms in the mountains. I think at this point, too, you all have heard of the House of Burgesses. Long ago, I think in 4th grade, perhaps, you've learned the House of Burgesses. But just to refresh your memory, the House of Burgesses is famous because it is the first elected assembly in the New World. And by the 1640s, it had been established. The property-owning white gentlemen made the rules and made the laws for the colony. And the nice thing about it is actually it's still around today. Now, in Virginia, we don't call it the House of Burgesses. Today, who makes the laws in Virginia? Do you know? It is the General Assembly. So, when you're complaining that you can't hold a cell phone to your ear when you drive your car because you're underage, you can thank the General Assembly for that. So, actually, when Mr. Garland and I retire, we're going to open up a burger joint down there by the General Assembly and call it the House of Burgesses. Here's a video clip. If you have time, you can watch it and answer these questions. We're just going to move on to the next slide. So, as soon as the settlers arrive at Jamestown, and they finally begin to grow tobacco and have these large-scale farms the Cavaliers do, they need workers. And there aren't enough workers to work the land, so they have to get their workers from somewhere else. Unfortunately, they will import their workers from Africa. And so, within basically 12 years, 12 years, from 1607 to 1619, the first Africans arrive against their will, and slavery will take hold in the southern United States because simply they were looking for a workforce. And we know this will eventually lead to the Civil War and a conflict between the North and South. So just to wrap up, early European exploration and colonization resulted in the redistribution of the world's population, meaning populations will shift from one area to another, basically from the Eastern Hemisphere to the Western Hemisphere, from Europe and Africa in the Eastern Hemisphere to the New World, North, Central, South America in the Western Hemisphere. Some came voluntarily. Some were looking for gold and land, right, and religious freedom. Some, unfortunately, were brought involuntarily. Those would be the slaves on the Middle Passage.